This court hereby sentences you to
A kill count video. Vito Scaletta is an ambitious man, so intent on pulling himself out of poverty, he's willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish that goal. This includes associating with the most dangerous people in Empire Bay, and spilling blood on their behalf. His crimes put him on the front lines during World War II and eventually in prison. His murders fly under the radar in the eyes of the law, however. So we're here to count those up and find out just how many people Vito put to rest.
And after years of doing everybody else's dirty work,
too many risks.
I was willing to risk anything to finally be somebody.
Much like Tommy Angelo 25 years prior, Vito was born in Sicily and moved to the United States at a young age. While the Angelos continued west to Lost Heaven, the Scaletta stayed in Empire Bay, where the glamour of the city quickly wore off when little Vito seized their dingy apartment. His father busted his ass doing manual labor and spent a lot on booze, leaving Vito to his own devices and befriending troublemaker Joe Barbaro. At 18 years old, Vito is caught and arrested after stealing from a jewelry shop while Joe gets away. He's given a choice: go to jail or join the army and head back to the old country. Within months, he's dropped in Sicily during Operation Husky and assisted by a local resistance when the fighting begins, where Vito scores his first kills of his young life, putting down 3 Italian soldiers in the streets. They move up to clear out the building, with another 13 men meeting their end courtesy of a very active Vito. But as soon as they take control, a full frontal assault from the Italians take place, with Vito manning the MG42 in the balcony and turning men into Swiss cheese for a full 37 seconds. A tank pulls up and blasts the upper floor, killing some and incapacitating Vito. But before he's put to rest, local mafioso Don Carlo suggests every one of Mussolini's soldiers lay down their arms and surrender to the Americans. They listen, and Vito survives to fight another day. But he's injured a couple years later and granted a month leave back home in 1945. He barely takes a few steps off the train before Joe greets him and offers him a beer. Hold the fuck up, that ain't a beer. Thinking he's here to stay, Joe suddenly gets up, learning Vito will rejoin the war effort in a few weeks. While Vito and this rando eye-fuck each other, Joe comes back with news saying his discharge papers will be ready tomorrow. They make plans to meet up the next day while Vito heads home and greets his mom and sister. The following day, Vito gets an earful from Mama Scaletta for continuing to associate with Joe and asks him to find some honest work at the docks. He goes outside and notices this Charlie Cutter-looking motherfucker harassing his sister. He wails on him until he runs off, and Francesca updates her brother on the situation. Their deadbeat dad borrowed $2,000 right before he died, which equates to about $35,000 in 2024 money. And the loan shark is demanding payment by the end of the week. Vito sets out to look for some well-paying work to pay these guys off and links up with Joe just for that. They drive to another location where Vito meets Giuseppe and obtains his discharge papers. They purchase some lockpicks on their way out, and Vito steals himself a brand new car, and then takes it to the shop for some upgrades. Nice. Afterwards, Joe takes Vito to meet Mike, who deals in stolen vehicles and is willing to provide a nice cut. He has to stand idly by while Joe complains about Mike's greasy fingies dirtying up his coat.
Calm down or I'll stick 'em up your ass, you sissy.
I love that. Joe provides a piece to Vito as they enter Bomber territory, a lower level gang that may give him trouble when he commits Grand Theft Auto in their streets. Joe will go back to Mike's and wait for Vito while he punches out some loudmouth fool and caps 3 guys that spot him jacking their ride. He outpaces anyone pursuing him and drives back to Mike, who hands over the cash and gives Vito a head start on paying the loan shark back. He crashes at Joe's and is awoken by his mommy when she calls asking where he's at. Obviously, I'm at Joe's, Ma. She implores him to speak to his father's previous boss, Mr. Papiato, for work, which he does later on that day. We listen unbearably as he eats that meat as loudly as possible and offers Vito $10 for the day to move some boxes. But after just a single one, he decides to bail, mentioning he can make far more with Joe. Joe's name means something around here though, so he's taken back upstairs and after a verification call is tasked with collecting barber fees from the workers downstairs. He roughs up a couple stubborn individuals and takes the money back to this guy who is taking forever to eat this damn steak. Or is that a new one? Afterwards, he finds Joe, who warns Vito they're about to meet Henry Tomasino, a soldato in the Mafia that assigns them separate jobs. Vito is to collect gas stamps from a government building that will fetch a lot of money due to the current gas shortage, so he meets up with the sister of one of their guys. Vito drives Maria to work while she provides intel on how he can get inside the building and where everything is. After dropping her off, he goes across the street, around the back, into an open window, and KOs the 3 guards inside, who won't count as kills since he's clearly just knocking them out. He obtains the key and opens the safe with it after disabling the alarm in the basement. He climbs out the way he came in and takes them back to Henry. Problem is, the stamps have an expiration date of tomorrow. So now Vito unexpectedly has to rush out and offload them to gas station attendants around the city who apparently only employ sextuplets. The following morning, Joe leaves a note for Vito to meet him at Freddy's down the street with a piece and some lockpicks. Henry informs them a man borrowed money from them to open a jewelry shop but is slow in paying them back, so they're going to reclaim their investment that night. Joe got the two of them disguises and they drive to the mall that night and use the lockpicks to get inside. But they can barely get to stealing before a car drives through the front and some Irishmen spill out looking to get in on the action. They have a mini standoff until cops arrive, and both Joe and Vito book it away from the gunfire. During their escape, Vito guns down 2 of the Irish lads and 11 cops inside and outside on the rooftop. They make it to ground level and escape while the cops are distracted with their arrests. Vito wakes up one morning to a woman in Joe's apartment who is on her way out, but relays a message from Joe to meet him at Freddy's later. When Vito goes outside, he witnesses a very angry fella rear-end the woman and get in her face. So Vito makes him eat his fists and declines when the woman offers up a slice of paisi. Vito pops into Freddy's where he meets Luca Guarino, who congratulates them on a job well done the other night. He has another job for them, and if they succeed, they'll be given the option of paying a $5,000 initiation fee to be a part of their family. They watch as the big boss slaps Luca around a little bit, and Henry gives them the lowdown on the job. A guy named Sidney Penn is refusing to cut them in on his business, so they're going to go insano mode on him using an MG42 from across the street. Vito picks it up from a fellow war vet and brings it to the apartment Henry and Joe are hiding out in, but these morons are basically right up on the windows, so the guys at street level spot them easily and warn Sidney as he pulls up. Vito unleashes hell on the 4 poor saps down below, and then takes the fight to street level before entering the warehouse and gunning down 19 more guys. They corner Sidney, who begs for his life, but when it's clear Henry will not let him live, he sneakily pulls a revolver out and nails Henry in the leg at close range. Vito and Joe riddle the man with lead, leaving him a bloody mess while they pull a severely injured Henry up. Vito fends off the remaining 3 fools and guides Henry to a car, then drives him to a discreet doctor who will treat his leg wound. Henry pays Vito for his services, which gives him just enough doubloons to pay off the loan shark. He drops that off with Francesca and gets some shut-eye at Joe's. But the following day, as soon as he leaves the apartment, some police are waiting to take him in. One of the gas station attendants ratted Vito out, who is now sentenced to 10 years in prison. He doesn't even listen to what this man is saying though, because by this point, anyone rocking that mustache should be ashamed. Vito is escorted to his new home for the foreseeable future, and after getting some advice from Joe, seeks out a man named Leo Galante inside. But while doing so, that lad O'Neill blames Vito and Joe for his current position and goes fisticuffs. About a minute later, the prison guards break it up and toss Vito into solitary confinement. 2 days later, Galante seeks Vito out and recruits him into his little club Tyler Durden would be stoked to see. He teaches Vito some new moves, and after some discussion, he learns that Henry and Luca were trying to rip him and Joe off with that $5,000 initiation fee. Galante says the families won't like hearing about their little side hustle before Vito's first fight is scheduled. He makes mincemeat out of him, and the second guy he's pitted against. Eventually, his sister comes to visit him with good news and bad news. The good is that she's getting married, but the bad is their ma is sick. Vito advises Francesca to get his leftover cash from Joe and use that to treat their mother and use what's left over as a wedding gift. Sometime later, Vito is forced into a confrontation with the booty warrior.
We can do this the easy way or the hard way.
Vito wails on these aggressive horn dogs and gets thrown into solitary confinement again for it, along with a letter bringing news of his mother's passing. Once he's taken out of there, he learns that Galante's prize fighter Pepe, who was scheduled to fight O'Neill, was jumped by his opponent's gang. So Vito is sent in to give O'Neill the same treatment, and winds up putting him to rest after he makes the mistake of pulling a knife on him. The guards could never find out who killed O'Neill, so Vito is treated about as well as one can be treated in the slammer. Galante is due to be released in a few months and tells Vito he'll try to work some magic for him when he's out. Vito spends a total of 6 years behind bars. But as promised, Galante was able to pull some strings and reduce his sentence to get him out early in 1951. The city has changed drastically in the years following World War II, and Vito is gifted some cash, a gun, and an apartment by Joe upon his release. He wants Vito to come back that night for a surprise, but Vito surprises Joe with a brand new haircut. What the fuck, man? He meets Eddie Scarpa of the Falcone crime family. and they go to a brothel for the night. Eddie gets far too drunk, disrespecting the ladies and himself before they leave, but soon after getting into the car, a foul stench singes the nostrils. This fucking guy Eddie killed a guy 2 days prior and stashed him in the trunk, so they drive out to a secluded spot to bury the guy. The next morning, Joe wakes Vito up to assist in offloading some cigs. They move locations and eventually get harassed by Billy Barnes and his gang of greasers, who demand payment if they're to do business on their turf. Joe pays with lead, and they chase the others but lose them on the highway. After calling Eddie, he demands payment and retribution and has them meet with a gang of guys to burn down the greasers' favorite hangout spot along with the frame rate. Afterwards, they drive to the foundry where the guys hole up and a firefight erupts, with Vito taking down the majority of them with 31 total kills that push him into triple-digit numbers. Vito claims one of the hot rods and takes it to the docks for cash, then brings that back to Eddie to pay him back. Vito is woken up in the morning by Eddie, who tells him to meet at the bar with a fast car and a gun. He meets Carlo Falcone for the first time, who quickly departs to make sure his brother Carmine hasn't been pulverized by a Batman. Clemente is looking to make a move on them, and his little bitch boy Luca Guarino has reportedly kidnapped 3 of Falcone's guys, including his accountant. Eddie needs Vito to tail Guarino and confirm if he indeed committed this infraction, and to whack the guy if so. Vito waits for Luca to get into his fancy schmancy car and tails him to the Clemente slaughterhouse. He finds a way inside via a sewer route where a pile of shit is dumped on him, forcing him to sneak around this place smelling like a great mighty poo. He locates Falcone's guys, who are hung up and being tortured. Oh god, what did he do to you? But Vito's foul stench gives away his position,
Jesus Christ, what is Captain Shitbag here to save the day?
Shut the fuck up, Luca.
which allows a big bruiser to sneak up on him for a brawl. Vito drops his gun, but during the fight, one of Falcone's men kicks it across the floor and gives Vito the upper hand, where he shoots the bruiser off screen for a kill. Now with weapons drawn, Vito is forced into taking down more of Luca's goons, netting another 13 kills. Vito and Tony bust down the room Luca is hiding out in, and Tony pummels the little snake, telling Vito he intends to pay him back with a long drawn-out death that will end with a meat grinder. So Vito dips out of there and meets Eddie at the bar. He's happy to hear the good news but tells him to get the fuck out and change his clothes now. He heads down the street and trashes his threads, putting on a nice suit with a public masturbator trench coat he takes back to the bar. Him and Joe get news they're becoming made men in the Falcone family, and Leo Galante is there to congratulate Vito. They go through their free initiation, and what follows is a montage of Joe and Vito living the high life, with Vito getting a house and both of them beating some fools up, but Joe is the only one killing people here. Again, Vito gets woken up by Eddie calling, who needs him down at Joe's apartment ASAP. Clemente is calling a meeting at a hotel downtown with his men, knowing the commission will give the green light on Falcone going to war with Clemente. So Falcone wants to strike hard and fast, and Joe intends to plant a bomb in their meeting room and take out the high-level guys all at once. They'll use a window washing platform to blend in and trigger the explosive, so when they head out, Joe's little neighbor kid Marty joins them as their getaway driver, and they pull into the parking garage. Joe and Vito switch into disguises, and do some cleaning to blend in, eventually being brought directly into their big meeting room to clean some blood. This gives them a chance to plant the bomb and cut a small hole in a window to thread the fuse through. They finish cleaning the blood up and saunter off, going up the staircase where they run into some of Clemente's goons and gun them down. After clearing them out, they summon the window washing platform with a very confused worker on it, who gets subdued to allow Vito and Joe time to descend to the 18th floor and wash the window while Joe pulls the fuse through, and they ascend back up where the bomb triggers prematurely. A lot of guys die here, but Joe planted the bomb and is responsible for the explosion, so Vito gets off clean, but makes up for it when they step into the wreckage and find out Clemente survived the blast. They go after him, putting down 19 of his goons as they follow him down to the parking garage. Clemente narrowly escapes as they enter the garage, but unfortunately Marty was shot dead, and that further motivates Joe to kill these bastards. Vito's driving allows Joe to gun down the remaining Clemente family, including the Don himself. They get to Joe's apartment where he reports their success, but Marty's death hits him hard, and he takes it out on Eddie and Vito. That night, Vito is woken up by telephone, which seems like a tradition at this point, but instead of Eddie, it's a bar owner who got his number from Joe. He's acting crazy, waving his gun around, and needs some help. So Vito goes to pick him up and has to clean up after him when he accidentally shoots the poor bar owner. He carries the body outside to a car and angrily drops Joe off at his apartment before taking the car and body to a crusher to hide the evidence. Vito is woken up by the doorbell, and when he waltzes outside, Henry Tomasino is there. He asks Vito to go for a drink, and on the drive admits the fall of the Clemente family has him concerned Falcone will hunt down any survivors. So he wants Vito to put in a good word for him to join up with the Falcones. He meets with Eddie, who gives him a job: kill Leo Galante. Vito is shocked by this request and can't assist Henry with it due to his relationship with Galante. Falcone thinks that Vinci wants to make a move on him and take full control of Empire Bay, so taking down Galante will cripple him and prevent that from happening. Soon after Henry bounces, Vito does as well and races to Galante's house to warn him. Galante informs Vito that Falcone is slinging dope, which ultimately led to Clemente's death and will now drive a wedge between Falcone and Vinci. Henry pulls in, and only now is Galante willing to listen and sneak out, but they're caught by Henry. Out of respect, Henry tells Vito he can leave the premises and he will not tell a soul, but he has to finish the job, otherwise it's his life. But turns out he and Galante work out a deal to make everyone happy. Galante will simply retire and leave town, and no one else will be the wiser. When Vito gets home, Francesca sits on his doorstep in tears. Her husband has been cheating, drinking, and assaulting her, so Vito crashes his party with an ass whooping and threatens his life. But that line of action doesn't jive with Francesca, and she calls him later to request his exit from her life. His eventful fucking day ain't over yet though, because in the dead of night some Irish lads pull up tossing firebombs. Vito does a barrel roll out the window and punches out the lone guy waiting out back while he escapes to Joe's. Joe makes a call to find out where these guys tend to hang out, and they drive down there immediately, putting 3 lads to rest in their bar and running down the 4th in the streets. With his house burned down, Vito needs a place to stay, and Joe is tired of this dude crashing on his couch, so he hands over the keys to Marty's old apartment. He gets a call from Henry, who has something big for him, and asks Vito to meet him in Lincoln Park. Hoping he has tickets for their upcoming show, he races to the park, but in the end, it's just another scheme with Joe. Henry knows for certain Falcone is dealing in drugs and has a plan to dabble in it for a wad of cash. But first, they need to get some cash up front from a local loan shark. They promise to pay back $55,000 in exchange for the $35,000 by the end of the week and take it to the Triads, who trade the cash for the product. But when they leave the warehouse, some cops stop them. However, their disguises are trash, and they're quickly seen through, causing an eruption and violence that results in 13 more kills for Vito. After wiping them out, the guys enjoy a montage, selling dope for cash, and yet again, Joe cannot contain himself and caps a guy during it. After that's over, Vito answers the phone at Joe's place and receives bad news from Henry. Falcone found out about their deal and took his cut of the cash, meaning they don't have the funds to pay the loan shark back now. He asks them to meet him in the park, but when they arrive, they hear screaming and realize the Triads are there hacking away at Henry for a brutal goddamn kill in broad daylight. They attempt to get away, but Joe and Vito open fire on them. Once they're downed, they notice the Triad boss they purchased the product from driving off, so they tail him to a restaurant and begin their raid. Vito pushes his total count over 200 while he uses a combination of different guns and explosives to shred the Triads while they hunt down Wong. They question him and he drops a bombshell. Henry Tomasino was a government informant, but they refuse to believe that and demand their money back. But Wong knows his life is at an end regardless, and Joe makes it happen. They leave quickly after that and outrun the cops back to Joe's apartment, where they realize they just started a war. Vito continues the tradition of being woken up via telephone, with Joe telling him today is the day they need to get that money for the loan shark. Eddie has an important job that pays well, so they start there. A man from an out-of-town family is hiding out in the burbs of Empire Bay, and they called in to get the guy whacked. So they take the red convertible Eddie provides and find the man watering his yard. They confirm his identity as Tommy Angelo, and Joe puts him to rest right there. They flee the scene and split up, with Vito going down to the docks to get some work from Derek, who is having issues with his employees after firing someone. Vito is handed a gun and told to look intimidating, while Derek goes down to convince them to start working. But the older gentleman recognizes Vito and drops a plot twist. His dad was killed on Derek's orders, which turns this routine job into a massacre, as Vito kills 17 of Derek's little bodyguards while immolating Derek himself in his own warehouse. He searches the office and finds a massive amount of cash stashed away, which gets him most of the way to paying off the loan shark, with the remaining amount coming when stealing vehicles for Mike. Afterwards, he heads to Joe's, but the big buffoon isn't home, so instead he meets with Eddie, who grills him about Henry's death and the Triad massacre in Chinatown. Vito claims he knows nothing and doesn't even get intel on Joe's whereabouts, so he meets Giuseppe. He informs Vito some of Vinci's men came and took Joe against his will. He suggests starting at the Vinci-owned bar, the Mona Lisa, and that works out well for him, at least in terms of finding Joe, not necessarily for his own well-being. During a lull in their torture, they break the bar they're hanging from and Joe murders the lone guard. In a nice change of pace, Vito gets some real stealth kills before he goes in guns blazing to get a hefty bump and kills during their escape. Vito drops Joe off at the discreet doctor and afterwards gives the loan shark his money back, but he learns this scumbag is the same one that gave the $2,000 loan to his father right before his death. Vito goes back to his shithole apartment where he reminisces about his time in the mob, recognizing things have gone tits up and he never intended it to be so chaotic. He gets to sleep and I'll give you 1 second to guess what happens next. He's woken up by telephone. Eddie says Vito's presence has been requested by Falcone up at the planetarium ASAP, which is sus as fuck. Right outside, a car with Galante awaits, who tells Vito he fucked up bad. And he knows that's true because this old-ass motherfucker won't even look Vito in the eyes. He just keeps staring off to the left as he chastises Vito for his actions. His only course of action is to kill Falcone, who has ambitions of becoming Empire Bay's only crime boss. So by whacking him, Vito will ensure his own survival because not only does Falcone want him dead, but Vinci and the Triads do too. Easy decision for Vito, who gets out and drives to the planetarium. The lackeys waiting for him ask for his gun, which prompts the firefight that ensues when Vito guns down the 2 guys in a cutscene and puts down another 39 as he makes sure this field trip locale needs a deep cleaning before another one can take place. Feeling good after eclipsing Tommy Angelo's numbers, Vito comes face to face with Carlo Falcone, who bitches and moans about Vito while Joe walks up beside him with a gun pointed at his head. Falcone's smug ass truly believes Joe has Vito dead to rights here, but under his breath he tells Vito they're gonna kill this bee together. And that they do, with Vito killing 10 more of his men before putting several rounds into Falcone himself to end his life. They go outside with Galante waiting, and when Vito reassures Joe things are okay, they're split into separate vehicles and Joe is taken to be killed. Galante informs Vito that Joe wasn't a part of their deal, and we get one last look at an angry Vito before the camera pans up on the city. 1951 was an insane and eventful year for Vito, but that isn't the last we see of him. He's eventually sent down south to the city of New Bordeaux, where he joins the Marcano family courtesy of Leo Galante in the commission. After about 17 years down there, Marcano looks to oust Vito from his organization, which results in a partnership between Vito and Mafia III protagonist Lincoln Clay. Marcano's nephew Greco is kidnapped by the two and tortured, with Vito striking the killing blow using a wrench. During the rest of the game, Vito assists Lincoln in taking over the city, and by the end Lincoln has to make a choice. None of these are confirmed canon, so it's really our own personal choice. Lincoln can choose to off Vito in what's a pretty difficult ending to watch, since he's continually betrayed by the people he works with, and he never finds out Joe Barbaro survived his murder attempt. If he does survive, he stays in New Bordeaux, either working under Lincoln as an underboss, or taking over the city and fashioning it into a southern Las Vegas. Let me know which one of these endings you consider canon for our boy Vito Scaletta, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe button down below for more videos like this. And that's where Vito's story ends. He spent a hell of a lot more time in the Mafia than Tommy Angelo, and came away with more kills as a result. He finished his career with 320 known kills. His favorite type of weapon to use were machine guns, with just over 52% of his total kills coming from rapid-fire weaponry. He had a much wider variety of enemy types than Tommy did, with Frank Vinci's goons nabbing the top spot at 63 bodies, or 19.7% of the total kill count. This game was really similar in length to Mafia 1, coming in 3 minutes shorter at 8 hours and 48 minutes. That gives us a kill on average every 1.65 minutes. Vito's mob career had many highs and many lows, but he always found a way to the other side. It's a shame he never finds out about Joe's fate courtesy of false information about his death. Joe would be another interesting character to do a video on, so if you want to see one, just let me know down below. I'll move on to Lincoln Clay next to wrap up the Mafia series, at least until the Old Country drops next year. Thanks as always for watching. I'm King Deschain, signing off for now.